In the spring of 1942, a suburban couple gives birth to a brilliant boy named Theodore J. Kaczynski, Ted, who soon grows up and excels in his studies. Seeing the promise in their firstborn, the couple nurtures Ted's academic pursuits, and he is accepted to Harvard University at the age of 16. There, Ted studies mathematics and earns a PhD a few years later. However, after a year of professorship at the university, Ted abandons his academic life, quits his job, turns his back on civilization, and flees to an American wilderness in the mountain town of Lincoln, Montana. There he purchases a small parcel of land and builds a 10 by 12 feet cabin with his younger brother David in the summer of 1971. Ted moves into his cabin in the middle of the forest and starts his new life without even the use of electricity or running water. He spends his time hunting for food, reading, thinking, and enjoying the surrounding nature and tranquility in complete isolation. However, a few years into this, Ted notices the slow but noticeable destruction and deforestation of the wilderness by modern technology, industrial expansions, and luxurious amusements, and becomes furious. Following this, Ted starts to contemplate possible ways to save the planet from destruction and humanity from its growing dependence on technology. One day in winter, a group of people decides to enjoy themselves by cruising the snowy scenery of the forest in snowmobiles, which causes noise pollution and frustrates Ted. Later, Ted waits until the group leaves their cottages and breaks in. He then vandalizes the home and destroys the snowmobiles. Later that night, Ted documents what he had done in numerical code and explains how one must fight against technology and its wreckage.
19, 18, 63.
The next morning, Ted uses the nearby stream water for some chores while taking note of the jets flying overhead and the noise disturbances they cause.
The only disruptive sounds were 9 evil jets.
Later, Ted bikes to town, goes to the library, and acquires the address of the president of United Airlines, Percy Wood. A few days later, Ted gets a job in town as a bar janitor. On his break, Ted calls his mother from a payphone, asks her to send him money, and blames her for pushing him too hard academically, as he believes that's what made him socially inept. Later that day, Ted returns to his cabin and becomes utterly frustrated to see the Montana Electric Company spraying pesticides on the vegetation. As punishment for the reckless action of the electric company, Ted chops down an electric pole the next morning. Later that day, Ted spends time in the beautiful fields around his cabin and enjoys a moment of peace and quiet. However, this is disrupted once again by jets flying overhead, and Ted becomes absolutely infuriated.
Then there was a very loud sonic boom.
This incident becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back, and after crying for hours in pure frustration and anger, Ted starts planning for revenge against those promoting technology and its control over humanity. That evening, Ted discreetly goes to a cottage in the forest and steals some car wires out of the vehicles parked in front of it. He uses the wires in combination with gunshot powder to make a bomb, tests it, and becomes frustrated at its inadequacy.
Absolutely frustrating. I can't seem to make a lethal bomb.
A few days later, ironically, Ted gets a job in a logging company. However, on his first day, he undermines his female manager and immediately gets fired.
On mechanical matters, please have your husband advise me on how to work.
Later, Ted discreetly returns to the company to vandalize its machines and throw a saw into the lake. Ted uses the next few days to channel his anger and frustration into designing his own version of justice to save humanity. He uses all his scientific knowledge to build bombs and test the efficiency of different combinations. Finally, he settles with a formula and buys some cutlery. He then goes camping in the forest, digs up a hidden case of chemicals, and starts building. He then melts the cutlery and prepares the rest of his ingredients. Then Ted carefully mixes everything, builds his bomb, and tests it. Satisfied with the results, Ted packs up his stuff and returns to his cabin with a plan to replicate his formula soon. Then, in the next few days, he gets a job in a nearby residence, tutoring a young boy in math, and excels at it.
He is really smart.
I think you've probably done enough.
Yeah.
A few days later, Ted rebuilds a bomb, sets it up in a book, and prepares to mail
The
it.
driver would doubtless remember I rode the bus that day.
Knowing that he would be easily noticed mailing the package from the small town of Montana, Ted heads to the big city in hopes of blending in with the anonymity and executing his plan. Hence, Ted gets on a bus and heads to the city. There, he stays at a motel where he shaves his beard and changes his appearance. Later that night, Ted mails the bomb to Percy Wood. After finishing his task, Ted decides to go for a walk around the city and finds a computer store. He goes inside out of curiosity and is disturbed by the noise and by people's interest in the machines. He then subtly finds out the identity of the store owner, Hugh Scruton, and leaves.
Probably more disk. Yes, I can use a fantastic productivity software.
Despite accomplishing his goal, Ted decides to stay in the city a while longer and gets a job at a gas station. In his free time, Ted continues thinking about technology's control over the human race and strengthens his conviction that he needs to take revenge for the greater good. Despite his academic brilliance, Ted continues to get sucked into his own delusional world and reasons that there's no peaceful way to solve the ever-growing control of technology over humans, and fears that if anyone found out about his wild plans, they would use it to show the need to control human behavior through different gadgets. One evening, Ted goes to a local store and collects DNA samples from the bathroom in hopes of using them to throw off investigators. That night, the bomb at Percy's residence is reported on the news, and Ted revels in the fact that the police have no leads and are confused by the fake name and non-existent returning address on the package. The news report adds that the fragments of the bomb have been carefully collected and sent to the Service Crime Laboratory in Washington, D.C. Then, Ted carefully builds his next bomb.
Today, inside Wood's home, investigators finished picking up pieces of the bomb.
Then, to make sure he stays anonymous, Ted decides to alter his appearance and breaks his nose with a cinder block. Ted changes his hairstyle, dons his hoodie and eyeglasses to mask his identity even further. The next day, Ted discreetly wires the bomb to Hugh's car. Moments later, Hugh gets into his car and dies in the ensuing explosion. After witnessing the disaster, Ted returns to his cabin in Montana. 18 months later, an oil company sends its helicopters on a seismic oil exploration over the forest, which annoys Ted into trying to shoot them down.
This helicopter's always in motion. Never know where they will go next.
Ted then gets a job arranging books in a library. Despite this new venture, he struggles to make ends meet and calls David to ask him for money. However, the phone call goes awry, and the brothers get into an argument. Ted then criticizes David for living a conventional married life and refuses to talk to his wife, Linda, whom he considers a bad influence on his brother. Ted continues his isolated, quiet life for the next few weeks, in which he goes on for days without even seeing another human. This only worsens his paranoia and misguided beliefs and his eagerness to take action. Then one morning, Ted is disturbed by motorcycle sounds, angrily follows it, and finds a couple of bikers enjoying themselves. Ted stoically walks towards them and warns them to stop and drives them away.
Get out! Get out of my property!
Then Ted joins an environmental extremist group called Earth First, attends their meetings, and becomes enthused with their cause.
You have to get up! Put your skin around!
The next day, Ted leaves his cabin and travels past a beautiful spring in which he takes a moment to swear to avenge the injustice being done to the forest and the planet at large. Then Ted uses his typewriter to write a detailed manifesto on the fate of humanity, its dependence on technology, and how it's robbed of its freedom because of it.
As for the negative consequences of eliminating industrial society, well,
Ted calls David to ask him for money and once again gets in a fight with him about his way of life.
right in the phone booth begging you. Do you feel powerful, David? Do you feel empowered?
Ted spends the next few days cruising the forest, enjoying nature and appreciating the tranquility.
If you don't have any work that needs to be done, you can sit for hours at a time just doing nothing.
One afternoon, the stillness of the forest is disturbed by a plane flying overhead, and Ted tries to shoot it down to no avail. Ted becomes so frustrated at the continuing interference, cries for hours in anger, and even considers killing himself so that he can escape it once and for all. Then Ted realizes that despite the murders and destruction, he has failed to make any real impact and decides that he needs to take a couple of years off to study and make bigger, more effective bombs that can get the nation's attention. He uses his time to perfect his craft, and once finished, he writes to the San Francisco editor, referring to himself as "we" and as the head of an environmentalist group called Freedom Club, FC, vowing to completely destroy the modern industrial society in every part of the world, once and for all. As the authorities start to search for any information they can on Ted, a couple of witness descriptions surface, and a police sketch is drawn and distributed of a hooded man wearing eyeglasses. Ted once again travels to the city, rents a motel room, and taking every precaution needed, builds a bomb.
You have a wide range, actually. You have corporate executives, you have...
Then Ted decides to prepare an escape plan and renews his passport so that he can flee to Canada and live off the wilderness in case things go sideways and the authorities come after him. Elsewhere, the police sketch gets approved, printed, and distributed on flyers all over town with the promise of reward money for anyone who can provide correct information on the figure. Ted starts taunting the FBI while making bombs from his motel room and mailing them to those whom he believes are promoting technology. Hence, one afternoon, an unsuspecting man opens his mail and is obliterated by Ted's bomb. Meanwhile, Ted goes to the headquarters of the phone company to formally register a complaint against the Montana phone company and accuses them of stealing his money through defunct payphones and demands they pay him back the $6 they have cheated him out of in the last year. In addition, he demands that the receptionist take his handwritten complaint letter to the management hierarchy so that they will understand the severity of his grievances. Confused by this unusual interaction, the receptionist politely informs Ted that he is not allowed to hand-deliver letters, apologizes on behalf of the phone company for Ted's inconvenience, and escorts him out.
But I've spoken to the operators about it several times, and nothing has been done over the years.
Disappointed by the response, Ted vows to write a detailed letter to his congressman. Then Ted returns to his cabin in the woods and continues to enjoy his primitive lifestyle to the full extent.
During my romantic phase, I continued to have fantasies of a primitive life.
Then after a few weeks, Ted completes and compiles his 35,000-word manifesto titled The Industrial Society and Its Future, in which he fearfully predicts that in the near future, humanity will no longer be equipped to make necessary decisions to keep its complex world going and give full control to machines, allowing them to control it, and despite having built and educated these machines, humans will be completely dependent on them. Ted adds that if there's no immediate interference to break this toxic cycle, humans will forever be unable to turn off these machines, as that would equal suicide. Ted continues to be disappointed by people's ignorant bliss, observes and makes notes from a distance of what he believes is the start of the downfall of humans. Then Ted writes a letter to the major newspaper outlets in the country, in which he describes that the FC anarchist group is tired of wasting its time mixing dangerous chemicals to make bombs and finding secluded areas to test them. Hence, he proposes a deal in which he promises to stop the terrorist attacks in exchange for his manifesto being published in the newspapers, so that the public will get a chance to read it, and in hopes that it will convince them. Just for good measure and to show how serious he is, Ted sends a bomb first, which soon explodes and intensifies the terror.
We will start building our next bomb.
Then once he gets the public's attention, Ted carefully packs and prepares multiple copies of the manifesto. On his way to the city to mail the manifesto, Ted calls David, gets into an argument, and angrily informs him that he doesn't want to hear from any of his family. Elsewhere, after receiving a letter threatening to blow up an airport, the FBI continues its frantic search to find the criminal terrorizing the nation, whom they dubbed the Unabomber. While the newspapers take time to decide whether to give in and accept the Unabomber's demands, Ted hides in his motel room and builds more bombs.
In the same way, while the industrial system is sick, we must destroy it.
Ted then sends the next bomb directly to the Postal Service office, where it detonates and causes destruction.
Detection techniques. It also graphically demonstrates the power of a mail bomb
Ted then returns to his cabin in Montana and settles back in. There, he carefully plans a retribution against the companies disturbing his peace and sets fire to the industrial trucks. A few days later, both the New York Times and the Washington Post cave and decide to publish Ted's manifesto for fear of more retribution. This makes the headline all over the country, and Ted celebrates as he hears it from his cabin on his old radio.
Yeah! Yeah!
Later, Ted goes to town, purchases a magazine, and delightedly reads his manifesto before burning it. Then Ted digs a hole in his cabin floor and makes an underground cave, while mentally thinking over everything and reassuring himself that he's not a terrorist and that, despite popular belief, he has been doing everything for the greater good.
The popular belief that you are a serial killer and should be treated like one.
7 months later, Ted receives a letter from David, who is worried about his brother's well-being, and asks him to come over to the cabin to visit him. Annoyed by his brother, Ted burns the letter and maintains radio silence.
Sure, come over, David. Please, yeah.
Ted continues his isolated life with nature and continues to enjoy his own company. Elsewhere, David reads the manifesto in the paper, recognizes his brother's tone and way of writing, and faces a moral dilemma. He spends months trying to figure out how to go forward, as he doesn't want to make the wrong decision and ruin his big brother's life. However, as time goes by, David can no longer deal with potential future dangers to the public and shares his suspicion with a renowned lawyer who alerts the FBI. The FBI takes the tip seriously and surveils Ted in the forest for a week. Then one morning, FBI agents disguise themselves as miners, bait Ted out of his cabin, and arrest him.
We are with the FBI! We have a warrant!
After decades of terror, the largest manhunt in the FBI's history finally yields results, and Ted's hauled away as more field officers rush to search his cabin. After gathering numerous pieces of incriminating evidence against the once brilliant math professor, the authorities compile a large case against him and take him to trial, where he is sentenced to life in prison for the 3 deaths and 22 injuries he caused.